Season 7.
The 7-year itch.
Everyone, we're so excited. We're mixing it up for the first episode of Season 7, which feels impossible, with two of our very favorite guests who've been with us from the very, very beginning, Season 1. We're here with Kate Clayborn.
Hi, everyone.
And Adriana Herrera, two of our favorites, both in the 5, possibly 10 timer club at this point.
10 timers in our hearts. Yeah. Oh, it's going to be all banter.
It's like a second home to us.
Exactly.
There you go. There you go.
Our very favorites. Welcome, everyone, to Fated Mates. This is Season 7. I'm Sarah McLean. I read romance novels, and I write them.
And I'm Jennifer Prokop, a romance reader and editor. And it's Season 7, which is crazy because everybody will remember, and we say this all the time because it's deeply hilarious, we were really only going to do like a season for Immortals After Dark.
We had a very strong plan. Like, it's Virgo season, and we have the kind of plan that really only delivers in Virgo season. Like, we knew exactly what we were doing. But we were going to do episodes about Cressley Cole's Immortals After Dark, and everybody and both of you, both Kate and Adriana, came and joined us. Adriana, you were the first of the two of you.
Born in America.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Kate joined us for my favorite titled episode.
Exclamation points.
Exclamation points.
I couldn't be trusted to talk about an actual Immortals After Dark book. I had to come on for one of the game makers books.
Although you did famously name the wolf hologram, right? Like that whole...
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Hologram.
That whole...
I did.
You know, we're like...
That's very important to me.
Oh, man. That just seems like 5 minutes ago, but also forever ago. So, I don't know. It was a whole pandemic ago.
It was a whole pandemic
Great
ago.
pandemic ago. That's true.
Several Olympic Games ago, you know?
Years before it.
And also, it should be said that Jen and Kate and I have a group chat that it continues to be named. It is like the only group chat that I have that has never been renamed. And it remains named for the moment where now I can't even remember his name. What's the hero of that book's name?
Well, they're all called Sebastian, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Where
He punches the window.
Yeah, he punches the window and he screams, Vika, do not leave me.
We're never changing that.
That's the master.
No, it's the
player.
The player.
But I can't remember the hero's name for some reason.
Because we're tired.
Doesn't matter.
Dimitri.
But when your car says, Kate said in Vika, do not leave me, punches window.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, and we have a group text, the 4 of us, which...
No, we can't talk about what that's
called. We can't talk about that one's called.
No.
That one is a little bit more fluid. That one changes frequently, and sometimes it's not for public consumption, right?
Maybe after the election.
Yes.
When all the stakes will seem lower.
That's true. That's true. So our idea was, along with some banter, right? And then really our plan is just to talk about like all the things we love about romance, what makes romance unmatched. And of course we had this whole idea and we were like kind of running by Eric, and he was literally like, he did not say it this way. I want to be clear. Every time I said Eric said, I am like putting words in his mouth and a tone.
Imbuing his words with a tone that isn't necessarily there.
Basically, it was like, you ding dongs. That's what every season of the podcast is about. We were like, it'll be like romance is unmatched. And he was like,
that's every day. That's every day.
Every conversation, every group text.
But we don't always do it with our friends. And that is what is the difference with this episode. But really, we just wanted to do something new and welcome you guys back because we haven't seen your faces or heard your voices in a long time. I mean, in this format.
Here we are. We're ready. We're ready to talk about romance being unmatched.
Perfect.
Locked and loaded.
So one of the things that we wanted to talk about that we've been bringing up is like, what are the things that really like brought us to romance in the beginning of our time with the genre that we really loved. And like maybe things that definitely things that installed our buttons, but like we're talking about the stuff that we don't see as much anymore that maybe we'd like to see more of.
I mean, other than hormones, because it must be said that all of us started reading romance in middle school, which is
Not
like
Kate.
No.
Kate.
Not me.
Kate's like, I was a good
Kate
girl.
would never.
A real good girl, not a romance good girl.
Kate was like, YA section only.
actual, like, textbook good girl.
Okay, here is my question though, Kate, because I am curious about this because one of the things, okay, I obviously started reading romance when I was really little, but then like looking back, the kinds of stories, like I'm older than everybody else, but I was so into like Han Solo kissing Princess Leia and I was 8 or whatever, right? So I think I always have been drawn to like even as a young kid, even like the most innocent like romance plots, right? So in some ways, I just think I found the genre earlier than you did, but like,
Yes, I think that's true. I mean, I loved love stories, and you know, I think before I had a language for things like, you know, what people call like shipping now. Like when I would watch TV shows, I would be like hoping that a couple would get together or whatever. Yeah, I think I just found it a lot later. And that maybe that's why like I feel like I fell so hard for the genre because I was like, where has this been my whole life?
no one told me about this stuff.
Yeah.
Truly a betrayal. Like the older women in your life did not do the job they should have done.
Yes.
There.
And sliding it in under the table.
Like your mom didn't read them. No, you don't. You don't have a sort of older woman who was like, oh yeah, I read those.
No. My mom, I remember, had a book in our house. This is like, I mean, I was way too young to pick this up. Clan of the Cave Bear.
Oh,
You remember Clan of the Cave Bear?
Everybody had that in the house.
Which like, it wasn't a romance, was it? No.
But it was like sexy in like in like a Neanderthal clubbing somebody over the head, like dragging her back
like
to
a
the
Joan
cave.
Collins.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
like
I remember reading that.
Jackie Collins wrote historical.
Right, yeah.
Would we call it historical?
Would we call it historical?
You know, there's a question for our time, right?
But I think I read it. I remember like going to her and being like, I don't think I was supposed to read this.
Kate, so pure.
Maybe.
But no, other than that, like she didn't have, I mean, I hear these like stories about people who's like Jen, you talk about your grandma who had these books and.
Yeah, but the thing about my grandma's house though, that bag of books was a real aberration. Like my grandmother's house was like full of Reader's Digest. Like, and so I remember reading things at my grandma's house, but it was like the desperate reading of, you know, because of course I would like bring a book over to my grandma's, but like then I finished it. I don't know. Like clearly I just was too dumb to really plan ahead. And so I would read like whatever I could find there, but it was like grandparents reading. It wasn't like good reading. So like that bag of books was not the kinds of things she read. And then it disappeared. And I really do think it was like, I don't really believe in a higher power, but a higher power at that moment was like, these need to be in this
Lord
basement.
left that for you.
Angels singing. But don't you think that there's also something to be said for, like, there is a large group, and I feel like this group of women gets erased, and when we talk about how you come to romance often. But my mom had a friend who lived down the street from us, Mrs. Haskins, and my story is my sister had all of her books and they were shoved under her bed and she went to college and then I read them all and then I would put them in the basement. Like they were just like stored in the basement in these big bags. And Mrs. Haskins was going through menopause and discovered romance in menopause. It was, again, going back to Adriana, it was hormonal.
Yeah.
And
Probably saved her life.
I have visions of that lady walking out of our house with just big carrier bags of like love sweps that she had, my mom being like, thank God, get them out of my house. And they like disappeared down the block. And what's funny is recently I saw Mrs. Haskins, and she was very sweet, and she had lovely things to say to me. And she was like, I read all your books when you were in middle school. And I was like, yes, Mrs. Haskins, I remember. But I do think like it finds you when it finds you, and it finds you when it's important.
Yeah. And I mean, I think for me, like going back to the original question of like the origins of romance, I think for me, the more important one is how I came back to it, because I clearly came into it. Hormones was a big part of it, but like I read romance throughout my teen years, and romance was not ever the only thing I read, but it was really like the thing I read for fun the most throughout my teen years and kind of like high school. And in college, it just fell off because I was reading about Black feminist thought, and I was like really finding my kind of like value system as an adult. And a lot of that was like feminism. And so I was starting to feel like really like a lot of like what I'm reading isn't aligning with like these like beliefs around like intersections and like, like the value of women and agency and like a lot of these things. So, and of course I was 21 and I was seeing everything in black and white, right? Like I couldn't like understand like the nuances of like how revolutionary it still was, even with not having everything that I needed to feel like this is aligning with my values.
Right.
But I came back to it in my early 30s after I'd had my daughter, and we're living in Ethiopia, and my job was stressful, and I needed stuff to read when I was in the field. I did a lot of field work where I had to go like, working in places where there wasn't electricity, and like I needed stuff to read that was light. I couldn't be reading these like very intense like manifestos that I was reading for a long time. And so I kind of dipped my toe in. My partner got me a Kindle, and I was like, the cheapest and easiest thing to download was romance.
Yeah.
And that was like the time.
When was that, Adriana?
Bella was born in 2008.
So it was right. We just talked about this on a more recent episode of the podcast. Like it was right when there wasn't a ton to get on a Kindle. Like, people now, the fire hose exists, but back then.
I had to buy them. It wasn't okay. But I could get like, I remember putting in the second book of the Black Dagger Brotherhood because it was on sale. And I put in a couple of Janine Frost books and like maybe one or two of the like Slave to Sensation and maybe like Kiss of Snow or something. I can't remember. Like it was like books that were like, and I came back from that trip. I was gone for like a week and I read them all in that week. And I came back and I was like, it was like it was a dormant cell. And I was like reactivated with these like 6 ebooks. And like within a month, I was like reading like dozens of books a month. And I had not read like that in a very long time. I mean, I read a lot. I've never read less than 50 books in a year, which is a lot for like your regular, but like I was like reading in the hundreds, like immediately after that. And it was because it was so nice to know what I was getting into, and I was going to get some kissing, and I was going to get some sexiness, and I was going to get some like men that growled, like all the things that make this genre great.
Well, you were also young enough that like you had a ton of backlists to go to, right? Like, because now I feel like now we're older. And so it's like, well, we're done with backlists. Like we've read all I know you've read every Susan Elizabeth Phillips, right? Every Lisa Kleypas, every J.R. Ward. And so it starts to get trickier. Finding discoverability is trickier.
I have a question for you, and I don't think I've ever thought to ask you this before. So growing up in the DR, when you were reading romance, was it in English, or were these like specific, like set in the DR, written by, like what was the like the profile of the romance that you could get your hands on in the DR as a teenager?
It was American romance. And so I went to an international school, which is why I speak English. So I went K through 12. I was in an international school. So usually, I mean, I read a lot of the things I read were in English. Like I would say I read a lot in Spanish too, like Isabel Allende, Julia Alvarez, like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, all of those like big authors. Of course, I would read them in Spanish. And there's a lot of literature available in Latin America that's written by Latin American authors. But like genre specifically is an American thing. And so like there was some like romance in like, but it was like Spanish, like people from Spain. I was like, not so into it. Yeah, like no offense to Spaniards, but like it just was not what I was going for. But I would come every summer. Like I've said this before, like I came every summer to the States because we had family in the States, and I would go to Walden Books and just like go bananas. And would literally bring back like a suitcase of romance novels, which to this day is like my mom's. Like I would give you money to buy clothes, and you would come back with like.
And look what happened, Mom.
So that was how I would get my romances. I would usually get like a year's supply. I mean, and we travel, like we would go to Miami like once or twice a year just for like long weekends and whatever. And I would like go to the mall and buy more. But yeah, it was in English. It was all ye old Joanna Lindsay's.
That's what I thought. But I was kind of like, wow, I never thought to ask before if there was like a local delicacy of, Dominican Republic romances. But it does seem so, I mean, that's the thing I guess we've learned from the Trailblazers, right? Like American romance really does dominate a lot of the market, even to this day, even though Mills and Boon is, quintessentially British, right?
Yeah, like Barbara Cartland, like also was one of those like big romance, but like I never really heard of Barbara Cartland until
no,
she wasn't
until you started paying attention to the history of it all.
This week's episode of Fated Mates is brought to you by Avery Maxwell, author of Love Notes and Lifelines.
Okay, this is the cutest idea for a series. Stella Anderson works for the Single Dad Hotline. Which is exactly what it sounds like. Basically, when men become single fathers and like have no idea how to deal with, I don't know, like dance recitals
or doctor's appointments,
packing lunches, there is a literal hotline that they can call where a person on the other end of the line will help them to like sort out their shit. I think this is delicious. So the rules are very clear. Like you handle the problem that is in front of you as the hotline operator. You never, ever, ever call or ever give any of your personal information to somebody who's calling in. And you absolutely never meet them outside of work.
Obviously.
Of course. When the phone rings and Stella Anderson picks it up on her shift, she does not expect that Becker Hayes will be on the other end of the line. Becker is not just any single dad. He is the owner of the company, her boss's boss's boss. And in the boardroom, he's like incredibly powerful and very detached and like unflappable and amazing. But he has just become guardian to his young nieces. He is absolutely reeling and he needs somebody to help him manage all of this. Well, Stella is immediately soft-hearted and like basically sees also an opportunity because her mom is quite sick to offer him a little like off the books time. And Jen, what do you think happens to that off the books time? Do you think they're packing lunches? I think Becker's packing something else.
I can't believe you just said that. I love it. Yes, he better be. So anyway, if you also love a romantic comedy about a small town billionaire, workplace shenanigans, and lunch packing, then this book is for you. It is available in print, ebook, or with your monthly subscription to Kindle Unlimited. And if your podcasting app supports it, you can click on the chapter title right now to be taken to buy the book. Thank you to Avery Maxwell for sponsoring this week's episode.
Well, doesn't it also feel a little bit like romance came through like Mills and Boon And then like American romance and contemporary or, historical came through Mills and Boone for sure. Like it had to have been somewhat inspired by that sort of like historical, like the English of it all. But then it feels like American contemporaries like were really inspired too. There was like this twist in the 80s of contemporary romance that was like Jackie Collins and Danielle Steele were really like pushing. Were you reading those, Adriana? Because those as like hugely influential. I feel like those were like in my house.
So interestingly enough, my mom had Jackie Collins novels in our house in Spanish.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, she was so massive that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I never read those as a kid because I've never liked reading translations. If I can just read it in the original language. And since I could read in English, I would just read it in English. And my mom was like, I know that's like too spicy for you. And I'm like, Mom, I'm watching like Red Shoe Diaries every Saturday night. Like you have no idea what's going on in my bed. And so I'd never read those because I was like, if my mom's reading them, perhaps it's just like too tame for me. So I never actually read Jackie Collins, I think, probably until I moved to the States.
My mom's not a romance reader, but my mom was very much, I would say, plugged into like what I would consider like the big books, like, right, like looking back, right? Like, so like I vividly remember like sort of like all the moms tittering about the Thornbirds. Although that was probably when like
there was a show too. The miniseries was on.
I think my mom read that.
Yeah, or like even at one point I mentioned, I mean, after the podcast started, The Flame and the Flower to my mom, and she got this like it was like really fascinating. I don't know.
That was
like,
in Yard Stare.
Yeah, exactly. Where she was like, I read that, like it just like something about that. It just like brought back a memory to her. So, I mean, I kind of remember my mom. I mean, my family, I have two brothers and my older brother is a big reader, but he mostly reads nonfiction. But my mom's still a pretty big reader, but it's always been sort of like what I would call like mainstream fiction. And then like sort of like, the big books, right? Like sort of the whatever those would be, but not necessarily. I don't know. So it's like interesting to have her kind of be like, where did this come from? You know what I mean? Like, why do you love this? I was like, I don't know, Mom. I just do.
All right. So let's talk about the buttons, right? Like so Kate, remind everybody how you started, how you came to romance. Do you remember your first?
Yeah. Jennifer Cruzy.
Because of Ohio.
Yeah. I mean, I went to the library in a place I had moved. I moved to a new place. I was very homesick. I was like doing my first sort of full-time adult job. I didn't know anyone where I was living. And so I went to the library and got books, and I got her book because she was from Ohio. The cover was very cheerful. And I mean, I really I think the age at which I started reading romance, like it really made me feel less lonely. And I think like part of that was because like I said before, like I was like, oh, all the books are like this, like about this thing that I am like drawn to in storytelling. And I was like very excited to find the genre as a whole. But I also just, I don't know, romance gives me like, when I read it, gives me a big sense of community, right? Like not just the central sort of love relationship, but also just like the world that is built around it. And those books just like really got me through a very like isolating time. And you know what? Like, I still think that one of the things I love about romance, and like, I often think about it, like what it was like to read romance for you guys when you were young and there wasn't like, you weren't tweeting or, posting on any social media groups about what you're reading or whatever. But like, something I really love about romance is like talking about it with other romance readers. And I feel lucky to live in a time where it's easy to connect with people that love them too. I mean, it's really fun to laugh with people about these books and like the shared language or shared experiences. And I mean, it has been like a huge, like balm for isolation to me. So romance means a lot to me in that specific way. And I think that's probably because, again, like I didn't know about it during those like formative years of like, being a teenager or whatever. I wasn't plugged into it.
Yeah, it's funny to think about reading in isolation like that, because of course I did, largely.
Yeah. Like sitting up in bed and like looking around when you read, like, when you read something in one of those
You
books
want to talk to someone?
What did I just read? What did this man just do or say? And you sit up and I think I've been thinking about this a lot in like the romance fandom through the ages and how it's evolved, like how we read. Like I was reading in the 90s where there was literally no place to talk about it. And then I found fic like, early 2000s where I was reading like fic and like talking about it with people, but that's very different because it's a different way of like connecting about like the specific thing that you're super into. And I think like about now how like reading romance is like a personality, like it's a lifestyle being a romance reader as opposed to just like being something that you're super into.
Yeah.
And I think it's because of the level of connection that you can have with people. Like even like when I came back to romance, Goodreads already existed. So there were already communities. Like I was like heavily involved in like the Black Dagger Brotherhood forums, like in like once I discovered queer romance, like right around that time too, like paranormal and queer romance were like my entry points back into romance. And so like there were like multiple forums on Goodreads with like hundreds of people, thousands of people talking about gay romance. And so that was already a way of building community, and then you could do meetups or whatever. And now then like YouTube came in, and then like now there's TikTok. So I think there's just like a level of like connection. Like first you could only type, your feelings to like this forum, and then you could tweet them. And now like people can see your face. So I think like that's why I feel like the fandoms have become more intense, because I think it is like you have so much more access to like people's reactions to these books.
But it feels like the genre has always been thirsty for that connection. I'm sure I've said this at some point and maybe to all of you, so I apologize for repeating it. But recently I just did an event with Nikki Payne at the Milwaukee Public Library, a virtual event. And we were talking about libraries, and after I tore through all my sister's books, ended up in the library, like at the, just taking out as many books as I could possibly find, like every Joanna Lindsay with Fabio, right? Ended up in my house at some point. And at the back of these books, in this very like mindful fashion, readers would make notations, like they would leave their little mark on the back cover of the book. And it was obviously so that we could all show ourselves like, okay, this is another Joanna Lindsay with Fabio on it. Did we read this? Right. But then there was this, and I so vividly remember it, this like kind of row of exclamation points that would be at the bottom of the page, in all the different inks and pencils. And it was like, if you liked it, you would mark it with an exclamation point. It was like Goodreads, like they invented the internet, these women, right, in this library. And I think all the time about this, like, I really want I want somebody to do the study of these women who were, and men too, but I think largely women who were just searching for like taking community in its like thimblefuls, because they certainly weren't all meeting up and admitting to reading these books at the library, but like there was something there about community. And I think that is the joy of romance. And we know that too from the podcast, like people are just, they want to be a part of it.
Well, I think the pandemic is what really showed that to us, right? I mean, this podcast started in fall of 2018, right? So it was pretty early in the tenure of Fated Mates that like the pandemic happened. And I remember thinking like, we're going to have to shut it down. Like this, we can't possibly be doing something so facile. I don't know, like silly. I don't like, I mean, I really like reverted back to a state of like, these are serious times. And how can we do a romance novel podcast when like, it feels like the whole world is ending? It just felt, I mean, I really did. And I would not say this is something I grappled with, but I thought it. Like, I just remember thinking like, oh, it's going to be like not the right thing. Right. And instead, it ended up being exactly the right thing. Like when I think about how many people were like, I was alone in my house, but you guys came on every week. And it, you know what I mean? And I think so much about how, and it got me through, right? It got me through like knowing we were recording and knowing that was still happening. So, I mean, it definitely speaks to like kind of a feeling that like Fated Mates really was like forged in fire in some ways.
I mean, romance is like, I mean, I wouldn't say not just sisterhood because romance is like not just women read romance, but I know for me, like as a person that didn't grow up with like a library system like the US has, like it's one of those things that like really distinguishes America from the rest of the world. We don't have public lending libraries like you have here. And I've said this before. I actually put it in my heroine on The Hustle has this little anecdote of like me moving to Astoria and my first year here and going to the like Queens Library and like going there and sitting and reading books, like not realizing I could just take them home.
Wow.
And like the first few times I would just go for Saturday afternoon. Like I was a grad student, I was broke, I had nowhere to go. So I would just like read books and the librarian was like, you know, you can just take them home. And I was like, and they don't trust me to bring them back.
What is this? Yeah.
I was like, okay, you clearly don't have a lot of Dominican patrons here. So I got my library card and then I was borrowing a little bit of romance, not a lot. Like I brought her a little bit because at that time I really wasn't reading very much romance. And I remember her like, if you like that one, you should read this one. Mm-hmm. And like, I think like romance, people like the romance, like handing off and like recommendation like network is the most robust. Like nobody's getting that exciting about like recommending like Lee Child. I know you love him, but you know what I'm saying? Like it's 100%. Like it's not the same.
Well, you don't need to, right? Because there's plenty of places to get recommendations like that. There's no right, and so it just is totally different. I mean, I think one of the things that is really hard for me to hear in our current like the book banning world, although I was very gratified to see just how many speakers at the DNC mentioned explicitly that book banning was something that like we don't do, is when I discovered romance when I was essentially like in middle school, right? And I would say like by the time I was in 8th or 9th grade, I was also just like getting my romances from the library. And you know, I look back like I never had a single librarian even ever make me feel anything like that I should not be reading these books. Right. I felt it. Like I vividly remember like the setup of like the library was like, you know, there were all the spinner racks, right? Because these were all like, you know, Harlequin Presents. And I remember that like they were next to like the fiction aisles and I would sort of like stand in the fiction aisles and kind of like look at them and see what I wanted and then like dart out and grab them and like, right? Like thinking that like, I don't know, lightning bolt. I was a good girl who was doing bad things, right? And I knew it.
That's just Catholic school, Jen.
Yeah. And I was super, you know, but I mean, I never once at any bookstore where I was buying one of these books or, you know, the B. Dalton bookstore at my local mall or at the, you know, this public library branch in Cuyahoga County ever felt any judgment from any adult who ever, like, it was just like, yeah, this is what you're reading. And I like looking back on that now, I think how miraculous it really is. And that's how it should be. Like it was fine, everyone. It was fine.
But people are still asking that question, right? I mean, you know, what do you say to people who judge, you know, what gives you the courage to read these in public? This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by Caitlin Brame, author of The Art Collector and The Siren Song, two novellas in Caitlin's Demons Among Us series that are both getting new covers this week.
I love it. And one of the things that's cool about this series is it's tied together not really by characters or plot, but rather by theme, meaning each book delivers an HEA between a different type of demon and an ambitious, professionally driven woman.
Listen, I don't hate it.
I know. In the art collector, we have Madeline Fry, who enjoys a simple, drama-free life. But what happens is she essentially lands a lucrative contract to appraise the paintings of an infamous mansion. And there she meets Thomas, who for over a century has resigned himself to a simple, solitary fate, refusing to let his hunger transform him into a monster. But then here comes Madeline. In Siren Song, Lena Summer can't win. She has just really is down and out. Like, right, the yoga studio she founded doesn't need her anymore. Her grandmother has just died and she just feels really alone until she meets Elias, a gorgeous man on the beach who has a very infectious, mesmerizing voice. The last thing he wants is a relationship with a human until along comes Lena. These books have been described as atmospheric and lush.
Well, listen, we love a demon here at Fated Mates, and if you do too, these books are for you. They're also for you if you love a gothic, mysterious mansions, gothic paintings, fall vibes, lonely art historians, and incubi. And of course, my favorite, dream sex is in here too. If you can get these books in both print and ebook. And if you click on the chapter title right now in special podcasting apps, you will be taken to purchase the book. Thanks so much to Caitlin Brame for sponsoring this week's episode. I guess, Kate, like you started when you were old enough to know that there was judgment for reading these in public.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say is like even as much as I think that what drew me to the genre was loneliness and how it really did, like it has over the years given me a very strong sense of community. I mean, I would also just say, and I assume that it was something similar for you all, except it just happened a lot younger, but like I felt that the books taught me a lot about myself. And yeah, I certainly knew that like people had judgments about this particular genre, many of which I probably had too, without ever thinking about it enough to like actually make a statement about it, but like, I mean, one of the things that I think is beautiful about the fact that I started reading it a little bit later was that like I felt that as I was reading, I could do a lot of self-interrogation and like interrogation of things around me. And, I think it was like a second adulthood in a lot of ways. Like what I experienced personally, like reading these books and thinking about what I loved about them. And, like I think I'm the kind of person who like, I don't really see a difference between like enjoying things and thinking really hard about them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like sometimes people like very understandably say like, I just want to read and kind of like turn off. Right. And like not, just sort of escape or whatever. And for me, like those things aren't inconsistent. Like whenever I'm reading, I'm thinking about why do I like this? Or what about this works? What about it? What is this saying about when it was written? Or I don't know. I love doing it. And romance gave me so much material to do that. It's something like I still really love about it.
One of the things I think is like really powerful, and maybe it's about all reading, but I think it's something that, and I've been thinking, I think a lot about this type of stuff every year as I'm going back to school, right? So it's like the beginning of a new school year, and I teach middle school, and I teach middle school English, and I'm like hyper aware of the fact that there's something that happens at school that turns kids from being readers into not readers, right? And I think that lots of kids push through it, but like lots of people don't. And maybe it's like later in life they discover like, wait, I like this. I mean, I think we saw a lot of people in the pandemic being like, wait, I forgot how much I like reading, right? But one of the things I think is like really powerful about, or like I would say for me about romance is, and I think Kate, you and I are a lot alike in this way, is like I am never turning off ever my like, why do I like this? What's interesting about this to me? Why is this working for me or not working for me? Why did I quit here? Why did I keep going here? Right? Like, I know this isn't working, but I'm reading to see if my prediction about what it is doing is correct. Like, and I feel like one of the things I think I have a lot of different conclusions, but one of the conclusions I have is that I think school reading can sort of essentially override your instincts as a reader. Because you have to read something, right? You are, you're like, I have to read this thing, and it doesn't matter. And so I think a lot of people just then approach a lot of reading that way. And I think the thing about like reading the things you want to read, whatever they are, is it really reteaches you to like listen to that instinct, right? Like, and I think that's one of the joys of like reading romance for me is because I can read it so fast, or because I'm reading it, I'm so familiar with it. I'm constantly able to like, I mean, like it's deep work for me about when something is working or not. Right. As opposed to if I'm reading like a mystery, which I also enjoy, I enjoy a mystery. Right. But I don't read enough of them to know, like, am I bored now because the mystery is boring or because something else? Whereas in romance, I feel like I can really like, I don't know, like it just allows me to keep drilling down into like who I am as a reader. And no one is more interested in who I am as a reader than me. I think about it all the time.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think perhaps it's why and I'm just like making it like, projecting my personal views about why we talk about it constantly and why we take it so seriously, like the work of romance, because I think I am also reading in that way of like what works for me. And I think like unlike a lot of people that like really have come into romance with the sense of like romance is not a serious thing, or they're just like fluff. But like I came from home, like the business was selling telenovelas. Like my dad sold romance and my mom sold romance, like literally for a living. That's how my parents made money. And so like the work of a good romance, like my mom would dissect like what was that would make that telenovela a hit as opposed to this one, because she had to sell them. And so like I literally grew up listening to my mom, like sitting down to watch it and being like, this is what's working. And this is what works about this particular like script writer, like that person, like this specific person, her scripts are always good because they do this and this and that. And so to me, like deconstructing what works about romance was something that is almost like instinctual for me, but also something that at a very young age, like I understood like the business of selling love stories is like serious. Like it, like when it's good. And when it doesn't work, it's hard to sell. Mm. And people are going to notice. And so like, I think for me, it's always something like, I guess, like, it's just like in the back of my mind, like, why is this working for me? Why is this particular writer does this thing that I really like, or this one doesn't?
I really love that point about like taking it, like, kind of knowing when to take it seriously, right? Like, I think about like, if you were reading, Jen, you were describing like seeing the Harlequin Presents on the
spinner
turnstile and kind of like leaping out to get it, right? And feeling a little, right? And like when you're young like that, or like me with Clan of the Cave Bear, like, I don't think I was supposed to read this, right? Like, you're kind of at an age where you're still figuring out what's okay, or you have a sense from like your community what's okay or what's not okay. But I think like as you get older and you're reading romance, like you take it so seriously that, sometimes people, I think, wonder if we don't want to talk about it more publicly or like share it with just any old person, like who asks us what we're reading lately, because we're ashamed. But it's like, No, I'm not ashamed. I just take it too seriously to have to talk to somebody who doesn't get it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to
to
go
explain
through the thing.
Yeah.
You know, like, because that's work.
Yeah.
Like, it is work to explain to you how seriously I take this. Right.
Yeah. I think that's great. Yeah.
And also, one step further, it's not just work, it's also like, and then when you respond in the way people often do, like just sort of taking it not seriously, then it diminishes my feelings for you. And like, it's just one more thing. I just don't have bandwidth to add to my feelings about people right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's always like a referendum on like our ability to know what's good and not good. You know what I mean? Like my ability, like my intellectual ability to read a text and be able to say, this is excellent writing, even if it's like all about like a happily ever after. And I think, I mean, we talk about this ad nauseum, the patriarchy and like diminishing the value of things that matter to women and like feelings and like joy. Like, I mean, coming off of this week, it's like thinking like centering joy and like holding on to that and like finding those things that give you what you need, but also deliver on like giving you a sense of hope is not trivial.
Right.
And it's actually what like gives us energy to like face the day. Like I feel that like in my bones this week. Like, and I think it's like the secret that we've all known for like many, many years. Like romance gives joy, gives hope, gives safe, like it's a sense of safety. And like having that in your life accessible and having like literally like a library of things that you know give you that feeling without fail. Like I know if I read Flowers from the Storm, or if I read like, you know, Devil in Winter, I will get the battery recharge I need.
Yes.
To face the hard way.
I mean, that's what I think. I'm sure you all do. I'm sometimes I lay in bed at night and I'm like, I'm so tired. I need to read before I fall asleep though. Like it just is something that has to happen. And sometimes I think to myself, like, okay, what it's like a wine cellar. I think like that's what people don't understand, right? Like, what is the exact like bouquet of the thing I need to flavor, like that I want, that's going to perfectly like, right? And that's it. I have an entire library full of books. And sometimes I'm literally mining for like, okay. And I'll just go find that book and read that one scene. And that's the thing I need to just like, and it's like, how could you describe, I mean, because that's the problem. And like love stories are, you know, I love that you brought up telenovelas. Like, look, everybody's talking all the time about like Love Island or The Bachelorette. Like these are like just another kinds of love story. But like, because I'm not familiar with them, if I was going to ask somebody to tell me about like Love Island, I think first they'd have to be like, okay, Jen, let me talk to you first about reality TV.
The structure of reality TV. Yeah.
And there's so many impediments to them getting to like why Love Island is so good for someone like me. And it's not, and that's like assuming like the best intention where I'm genuinely curious about what, you know, tell me about it. And I think that that's the part, like, yeah, like I love it so much that it's hard to even, you know, sometimes people are like, what do you love about it? I'm like, can you just listen to 6 seasons of Fated Mates and tell me when you're done?
Just hand them a sticker.
You know?
And it is hard to like, I think romance, like understanding the impact and the work that romance does, like for people's like joy is hard for people to, it's hard to describe because it almost all sounds like silly, like, okay, you're silly books. I'm like, but at the same time, like you said, the connection, the community, I told this, like I met Nalini Singh at Stimulant this summer and I had never met her in person. And I cried.
Yeah.
She came up to me and she recognized me from the internet because like, you know, we follow each other. And she was like, are we going this way? I'm like, oh my, you can't talk to me like you and I are the same. You know, like you are someone who cannot talk to me like you and I are the same kind of people. And I told her, like, when I lived in Ethiopia, we had like a lending library. Like we basically, like we would buy these books and like we all read the Sight Changeling series. We all read the Black Brother Daggerhood. We all read the Fever series together. And like those women and I still call each other like nicknames from characters from those books. And I haven't lived in Ethiopia since 2011.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And like, we still talk about like reading those books together, like 10 years later. And I think people just don't realize like that it's almost like romance is what does that, because you read books that you just want to talk about.
Yeah.
Well, it's joy, right? I mean, not to be reductive about it, but it feels like we just are trained from birth to think like joy is somehow less valuable than all the other feelings. And so it feels like at some point when we get to romance and we discover this genre that is just like constantly just shooting joy into our veins, you know, people don't understand. They don't understand why you would read a book that makes you happy. And that's weird to me.
Part of the big fabric of literature is like the idea of catharsis, like what you are doing when you're reading or seeing a play or like engaging in a lot of like artistic, you know, any kind of consumption of art, right? Like part of what you seek is like some kind of catharsis. And like I've been thinking a lot about how a lot of like my favorite romances or my favorite moments in romance are like not joyful, right?
Yeah,
like
right.
No,
It's before the joy, right?
but is it because of that? Is it because they're not joyful, or is it because they're not joyful and then you know it's all going to work out?
What I'm so in love with is like the restoration,
Yeah.
right? So like,
Yes.
yeah, I mean like,
Yes.
certainly joy is like part of like sharing these books with others and like talking about them. And, you know, like even there are obviously lots of moments in romances that are very joyful, but like, you know, when I think about the books that have affected me most, it's like the books that will drag me to like the lowest low and then restore something. Like that is a very meaningful thing to me about romance. Like that feeling that it gives me to experience that safely. Yeah, I really love that about these books.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the scenes I reread, I am picking up at the lowest point in the book.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And do you then read through to the end?
Sometimes, but sometimes not. You know, I like to leave a man in cold storage. But I think what I'm looking for at that moment, though, is like, again, like sort of a, like, yes, like the restoration part, but also like, I just want to tap into the big feelings, right? Like, so I don't know if that's just because like at my job, children may be dysregulated at work. I cannot be, right? Like it would be a terrible middle school teacher if I was like, what? And so I think sometimes I wonder if like what it allows me to do is just really like just go down to like some low place, right? And like let myself feel that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, when I was like training to be a trauma therapist, I was reading like a lot of romance, like a lot of it. And I think it's because I was taking in all of these like really sad love stories that end up being destructive and you know, have like terrible endings. And I needed kind of like to experience like things that fall apart, but then are okay in the end. And that like for me was always like therapeutic, like just being able to like take in relationships that have hurdles, men that in moments of like crisis of intensity choose to like don't choose violence. And I think like the safety of exploring and the safety of exploring so many things. Like I always say, like with romance, like your sexuality, desire, like the things that you don't tell yourself that like turn you on or that you're curious about are things that you can safely, quietly explore in romance. And you don't even have to tell anyone about it. Like, I think to me, like there's things that I love to talk about other romance like readers with and like my friends. And there are things that I don't ever tell anyone. about the pieces and the places and that I go in romance that just are like kind of quenching a thirst that I don't even want to talk about. It's just there for me and it's private and it's something that romance gives me safely.
Yeah, that's just between me and Kindle Unlimited.
Correct.
It just fills you right up.
I think the one thing that I've been thinking about a lot this week though too is the joy of like the romance community. One of the things it brings me, right, is like ways of talking about the books that are like ever more sophisticated. And like one thing I think we asked you to sort of talk about, and I was thinking a lot about like why, was like this idea of like your favorite microtrope. Like this is something that goes around on Twitter or on Threads or whatever.
Kate's so good at this on Twitter. If you don't follow Kate on Threads, you should be following Kate on Threads because she's perfect at these microtropes.
My brain is just like
it's
like,
a constant microtrope churn. It's fabulous.
I was gonna say she posted once about like the man holding on to the top of the door jamb,
and then it became a TikTok phenomenon.
Yeah. I think about
I don't
that.
sanction that.
Yeah.
I don't.
I think about that once a week.
Yeah. Right.
Just reading a book the other day, and it was like a second chance romance, like they had split up when they were young, and the hero had tattoos. And like as soon as I read it, I was like, one of those tattoos better be for her.
Yeah.
Right? Like
right.
That's the rule.
It's just
come on.
And I'm absolutely obsessed with things like that in romance. Like I think they are community transactions. I think they are like dialect building. I think they're incredibly revealing about culture.
This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by Blue Box Press, publishers of Kristen Ashley's Embracing the Change.
So gorgeous, handsome billionaire Jamie Oakley has had...
Say less, Jen.
has had what he thought were two happily ever afters in his life. But both of them ended in tragedy, and he is just not going to try again. He's not going to put himself or his children through it. He's learned from experience that he just needs to not go down that road of trying to find love again.
Poor baby.
However, he does have a bestie, gorgeous New York socialite, Nora Ellington. And she, of course, Sarah, is deeply in love with him. Right?
Listen, the only way Friends to Lovers works is unrequited love.
Yeah, well,
I said what I said.
So she's like, I'm tired of my friends without benefits situation. And this, he's out of reach. But then one night, he loses his control and kisses Nora. And what is going to happen? She finally is like, I know how great it can be. Let's do this thing. And he's like, I can't go there. The angst will be amazing.
Yeah, but you know what's going to happen. This is a Kristen Ashley novel. They're going to bang it all over everywhere. They're going to do it everywhere.
Everywhere.
Listen, if you like a book where they do it everywhere, or Friends to Lovers, or Second Chance Romance, or Unrequited Love, or just, an alpha billionaire, Kristen Ashley is the girl for you. You can find this book, Embracing the Change, in print or ebook right now. It's part of Kristen's River Rain series, but it can be read as a standalone. And if your podcasting app supports it, you can click on the chapter title right now to be taken to buy the book. Thanks to Blue Box Press and Kristen Ashley for sponsoring this week's episode.
Well, I think the other thing, though, that's really interesting to me about microtropes is, as an editor, one of the things that I see is sometimes I have a hard time answering that question, actually. It's not something where I have a bunch of them. It's I recognize them when I see them. But when I'm editing, I will clue right into them. Hey, wait, if this happens, then this better fucking happen. Right. And I think that that's where I actually see it more is I recognize its absence in the books that I am lucky enough to sort of have some sort of feedback loop to the author before it gets out there into the world.
Well, it's promise of the premise, right? And it's only available to us in genre, right? Where and we've done, I mean, I've asked all of you, anytime you write a road trip romance, right? It's like, what are the things that have to happen? And that's because as readers, like, there is this magnificent moment when, he has to rip open the door of the carriage and like, she's not there. Or like, there's some kind of something where suddenly it all clicks into place because you've read it before and you know how it goes. And there's like that comfort. It's the purest of comfort in those moments.
It's the covenant.
Yeah.
It's the covenant.
Yeah.
Like, you have told me that you're going to, if she's working late, if she's got a project and she's working late and she's overworked and tired, that man better show up with some food for her and like make sure she's okay and take care of her.
Yeah.
Because
he's going to be there to walk her home. Like, that's
right.
Why else would you tell me that she's overworked?
What's even the point of this knowledge?
What even is the point?
What's the point of it?
But he would never bother her. Like, he's going to do that and be proud of her and let her be amazing. Like, there's so many layers to these microtropes too. Like, they have to go a certain way.
Yeah.
Yeah. See her and be amazed by how amazing she is.
Exactly.
Humbled by the fact that he can even look at her. And then he brings her food.
Yeah.
Mine is like, one of mine is sort of the opposite. Well, I guess it's not the opposite, but it's similar to that. And I know it's one of Sarah's favorites too, which is like anytime a love interest is really bad at something and the other person like pretends like they like it or that they're not bad at it. That's like
that is 100% God tier.
Yeah. So like,
that is,
I think twice I've done it with like cooking, right? But like, it's like, I'm not in awe of you. Like, you're pretty shit at this, but like, I like you so much.
Yep. And would do actual harm to anybody who critiqued it.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's not about
like
logic.
Everybody's eating these cookies.
Shut up. It's
You're
perfect.
all going to like them.
Yes. Right. Well, I think
that is an excellent microtrope.
Yeah. I love that.
That's a good one. I think the one I have is, I actually like, I kind of forgot this. I had to like remember is, like the main characters don't know each other yet. The love interests don't know each other yet. And one of them is like sick or harmed or in a coma or something. And yet through this veil of like, they recognize each other, right? Like, this voice has like pulled me out of the
angel,
coma of
like
this
speaking,
nurse, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
yes, like Reese and Helen.
Yes.
Or,
right. Yeah. Like, I love that. Yeah. Right. Like, just like the idea of like, I am barely human at this moment, but yet I recognize.
Yeah.
Right.
Her voice killed me. I was lying now. I can say. So, you know what? Another one that I love and didn't recognize that I love that specific thing until Jen was like, my favorite thing is when she leaves. Oh, yeah. He's terrible. He does the terrible thing in the first chapter. She leaves and then he has to literally tear his entire life apart to get her back. That is, I mean, that's like a lot. It is kind of like a micro trope because it's usually like some kind of like other things going on. But like that specific thing, the act of her leaving and him having to get her back is well executed. I mean, I think that there's like, it's just like top tier romance.
You know, as newer people come into the genre, like one of the things that I think is always a little tricky to kind of understand or like have people get is that like tropes are not conflict, tropes are not plot, right? Like enemies to lovers actually is just a trope. Like it doesn't actually, And I think one of the things I was thinking about in preparation for this is like, I think I want to say to someone like, okay, but you do understand that if I say like, secret spectacles, right? Which is what B in her books calls it when all of a sudden he like puts on a pair of glasses and she's like, oh shit, you're so hot, right? That is like a micro trope we love and we key right into, but like that alone, when it's a micro trope you can see does nothing, right? Like it is not doing anything, for the book. You have to like build a lot of character and plot around that. And I think it's one of the things that's really funny as I was thinking like, oh, maybe it will be easier to explain to people why tropes aren't plot if they can understand why microtropes are also not plot, right? But yeah, I mean, I think it's, I just think it's really fascinating too, because the more you, again, like if you would, this is like newer language to me, but it really speaks to how we are so able to like sort of, it's so much more granular, right? Like the way that we can talk about what's happening in a book and what we love about it, right?
I mean, I was taught, we were in the texting, and I said inappropriate use of good girl is one of like my biggest qualms with romance right now. And I think, like, again, like to me, like the delivery of a good girl is like, it's something that you've been working up to from the moment that you put that man on the page. Like you are working up to him be able to deploy that good girl and make me feel it. Because anybody can say good girl.
Yep.
Right.
But can you execute a good girl? And that is character work.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that a lot of this is really interesting because much of what we're talking about is character work, right? Like you have to believe that he's going to turn up at the office with food. You have to believe that he's going to have the type of person you have to believe that it's a surprise that there's the secret tattoo, embedded in all of the other ink on his body. Like these are things that are so specific. Microtropes, part of their joy is that they are so specific in the writing that they make us feel like the story is universally, like is a universal one. Like the more specific, and we know this as writers, right? Like the more, and editors, the more specific the character, the more relatable in some ways.
Yeah.
But that's why microtropes work so well.
Everyone knows I don't like really love a pet in romance, right? Like that's like not something I'm really drawn to.
Pet one.
Right?
Yep.
But I do like it when like the pet only like doesn't like anybody, but then the love interest walks in and all of a sudden the cat's like, let me lay on your head and groom you because I hate every other person. But the other main character has to be like, but wait, what does it mean my cat who doesn't like anybody all of a sudden likes this person? Like, and so I do think like the other thing I have a theory that about like sometimes microtropes are an inversion of a trope that doesn't quite work for you, but then this is like a doorway into it somehow.
Yeah.
What's one of yours, Sarah?
Oh, I was going to say, I also had a pet one too. I really like it when they're like cold and when a hero is like, I hate that. Like, I don't care about, I don't want that animal anywhere near me. Like, I'm too masculine and, buttoned up to have animals. And then like by the end, but she loves the animal. And then by the end, like, he's lost her or whatever, and he's like going everywhere and he just has the animal with him. I've written that. It's one of my favorite microtropes.
That's like every dad with the family.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, exactly.
I like a really like tough character that I think this is like in the same family. I like a really tough character who like keeps sweets in his pocket, like like Wit and from Hattie and Wit. I love that from Brazen and the Beast. I love like specific, like I like a gamekeeper's cottage.
Oh yeah, sure.
Oh yeah,
like in a historical, like if they are out and the storm hits, I'm like, there better be a fucking gamekeeper's cottage somewhere around here. And like
a folly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And the blankets are clean.
It's interesting because Jen, I think you're hitting on something, which is like a thing that in real life you would, or that in sort of you dislike twisted. Yeah. Because I, as everyone knows, do not like the outdoors, but I really do I like it when there's like a really isolated outdoor moment in a book. Like I like it when one person is alone and the other one just happens to find them in the outdoors.
Oh, yeah.
Like, so on a dock or like in a, I love that moment where they're like in their head and then the other character
person
arrives.
appears.
And it's just, it feels in the right, again, like in the writing of that moment, I'm always like, this is totally unbelievable. Like there's an entire city of London here. Like how would they know to like be in this place? But
of course, these are your tropes, given the title of this podcast.
Of course. You know,
but it's like I like it when they're summoned to each other. Yeah, exactly.
There's a pull.
There's a pull. Yeah. I love another one I was thinking about that I love, and this is very specifically in like male-female romance, is when he is like, of course, like very serious and buttoned up about something, right? And she's just like, I know nothing about that. But like then like, and I think to me like the prototypical scene from this is like a Julie Garwood where they're on a pirate ship and he's a pirate and she gets cold. So she's like sets a fire in the hearth. And it is not a hearth. There are no hearths on boats.
You don't light fires
she
on
basically
ships.
almost sets the ship on fire. And he's just like, and then there's this really funny, and I love it when like that devolves into like real comedy, right? Because she's just like, why do you have to be so serious about your fantasy football or whatever? You're like, it's fantasy football. It's the hearth on the boat. It's whatever, you know, just when she's just like, what you take seriously is just silly. You know, and yeah, so there's a great scene then where he's like, you know, she gets really upset that he doesn't have a nickname for her. I haven't read this book in a long time because I actually love it so much. I'm afraid it won't live up to my memory. And so it just like lives there kind of perfectly.
Wait, this is a Garwood?
Yeah, The Guardian. Is it? No, the one where it's like Nathan and Sarah, right? I reread the beginning. This is the one you love where she's a child, right? Like,
right? The wedding.
Yeah. That's not the name of it.
The Bride.
Nope, that's not it either.
Is it The Gift?
Yes, that's it.
The Gift.
Yes.
It's The Gift.
Julie Garwood got in early.
We're just naming. We're just naming all
now. You know, the payphone.
Sarah loves it. Yeah. Sarah, you love a Guardian ward.
I love a Guardian ward.
But there's
it's so wrong
where she is really really upset that he has not given her a nickname, like a cutesy, like lovey-dovey name. And then she's like, oh, no, wait, I have one. And he's like, and she's like, it's damn it, Sarah. Because he's like, damn it, Sarah. And then he's like,
when we did that episode, that's the title of that episode. Damn it, Sarah.
So, yeah. So I love that.
You like the exasperation.
I like an exasperated man. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Exasperated man is, I mean, that's like almost like an archetype. And it's a specific dynamic, right? Like it's got to be a certain kind of protagonist kind of like juxtaposed with another kind of, but that one is, I mean, usually it lends itself for like really good banter and like really good moments of comedy. I love like when, like, I mean, I write a lot of people that are coming into a new place, right? Like and I love like a moment where the love interest like brings them something that they're missing, you know, like something that they haven't had in a long time or something that like takes them to a place that's familiar. Like, I don't know, like in Eris, like, Evan takes her to the beach, right? Because she like is missing the ocean and then she cries to the water super cold as opposed to the water in the Caribbean. But like, I think it's like that piece of like, like having someone bring you something like when you're homesick is like a really good microtrope for me.
I'm kind of like obsessed with what Jen said about like the microtropes you love being somehow like an inversion of things in your life that you don't love, or I don't know. I'm really thinking a lot about like, you know, earlier you said like as a teacher, you can't really be like emotionally dysregulated, right?
Right.
But, you know, I kind of feel like in a lot of aspects of life, we're not really permitted a lot of that kind of dysregulation, or like for me especially, like I don't like to be angry, like I don't really, I try to steer very clear of people who I think are angry, like I don't want to engage with it, but it's really interesting that like something I really gravitate toward in romance is like a very like angry moment where like I can't think of a good example right now, but I know like if I'm describing it, like at least one of you will have a great example of this. But like when a love interest like misjudges the the person they're in love with, or like accuses them of something, or thinks the worst of them, right?
It's Reese and Helen.
It's what?
It's Reese and Helen when Helen leaves him because she thinks he'll
right. Yeah. He'll judge. And
it's man won't love her. What an idiot.
Like, I'm really drawn to a moment like that where like there's such a terrible blow up between two people, and like feelings are so genuinely hurt, and trust is so genuinely broken. Like,
and then he chases her down in a train station.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Furious.
And kind of like, Adriana, kind of like you said, even though like your example is from like when this happens in the first chapter, but like I really love it when like one character has to totally sort of dismantle their life in order to get the other back, right? Like, because I mean, who has the time for that in regular, like in your regular life? A lot of people are just like,
I think
let me just get through my work day.
A lot of these is why like Run Posey Run to me is a book that like when I think about like it presses like a lot of these buttons all at once, right? Yeah. Like because he misjudges her to the point where like he really puts her life in danger, and then of course she disappears and doesn't come back, and and then it's like he has to really then figure out like, wait, what happened? Like, where did I go wrong in this like certainty that I knew how our life was? And I think it's also one of the few examples where they were together before and none of that is important. And like, talk about a book that starts in the right place, right? Like one of the things, the biggest mistake, it's like in many ways, almost like a second chance romance that starts like from the breakup. Right. And I think that like it's really a brilliant book that like really mines some of that. Like I really fucked up, but instead of it coming at the end, it came at the beginning. Nothing before matters because everything else after is different. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about like St. Vincent and Evangeline when he like blows up at her and tells her like, get out of here. Like he just really is so terrible to her. And like by this and again, like masterful writing, like had he done that 3 chapters before, like you have to put that book down because that man is irredeemable, right? But like he does it at the moment where he's just in agony because he loves her so much, and he is beside himself, and he is a complete absolute basket case. And he is so scared for her and so scared to love her that he just blows up at her.
Harry and the Henderson style.
He gets shot.
Harry and the Henderson style. One of the few movies I've ever cried
That
at.
is a real trope in romance, Harry and the Hendersons.
Yeah. Get out and go away.
Get out and go away.
Go.
Yeah.
Leave me.
I have to say, and I'm almost like, don't judge me, however many thousands of people listen to this podcast. I might tell you to cut this later. But like another thing I love in a romance is like when there is some kind of accident where like there's actual physical harm sustained, and like it's at least partially his fault somehow.
Flowers from the storm, baby. Right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Really, I'm like, again, like it goes back to like the catharsis. Like what I want is the restoration, right? So like those kind of moments will completely lock me into a romance. Even if it's something like even if it's like they have sex and the next morning she has a bruise and he's like, oh my God, I heard that I've given you this bruise.
I'm such a beast. God, that is
really.
That's the
I'll probably tell you to cut this later.
At the end of the day,
that's perfect.
Yeah, no, it is perfect because I mean, at the end of the day, right? Like these men are avatars, right? For a patriarchy, for this system that usually is like it doesn't budge.
Yeah.
Like you can slam yourself against it your entire life, and it just repels you back. It doesn't crack.
Mm-hmm.
And yet this thing that we can, build as the patriarchy, and this woman eventually just literally gets that every weak spot, right? Like there's no defenses. He's completely vulnerable to her, and anything that hurts her destroys him. Like that is like that's
the high I'm chasing.
Yeah, that's right? The money.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's it. Like it's not about her getting hurt. It's about what it does to him to see her hurt, and him taking accountability and knowing for once consequences.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I mean, that's it, baby. That's the bread and butter.
There's I've mentioned, like, I really like this Kate Daniels series, and it's like 10 books. So it's like more like urban fantasy. It's Alona Andrews. But there's a book that like everyone else hates, where Curran, they're already like mated, right? But they go like overseas. They're like trying to achieve something. And in order to do it, he essentially has to like act almost like he's about to like leave her in order to convince the people, he's trying to court, that like, whatever, doesn't matter. And of course I am like, oh yeah, this is what I like. And when she finally kind of loses her mind and like goes off, right? Essentially like it, again, goes off and she has no idea where she is. He like goes into his beast form, which is like this huge like lion or whatever. And then like tears the fucking countryside apart looking for her. And I was like, and people are like, that's my least favorite one. And I was like, okay, so you're wrong. But right? Because I will read that scene where he like comes like essentially like tearing things down to find her. And I'm like, this is what I want. But yeah, all that.
You love that. That's Lover, Rage, and Mary.
Yes.
Too.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I mean, and the guy one of my favorite series of all time is the Fever series by Karen Marie Monet.
Yeah.
And like he tells her all the time, like, she's like, I don't know who you are. There's a lot of like cloak and dagger around who he is and what kind of demon he is, and like who is Jericho Barons is a big question throughout the series. But every time she comes to him, like, you lie to me, you don't tell me what's going on, like you want me to say what you want and you never tell me what I want. And he tells her, I'm the one that will never let you die. And every time she's in trouble, that man shows up and saves her every single time. And like throughout the series, like every time he says that, like gains more and more power for the reader. Because at this, by the fifth book, he's literally saved her life like 10 times. Like, I don't have to tell you anything about who I am, and I don't have to tell you how I feel about anything, because I'm the one who never lets you die.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty fucking great.
That's stakes. That's what we call stakes.
That's all I want. That's why I'm here.
Well, you know what? I do think a lot about, the reason why romantasy is so big is because then the stakes just get to be so big.
Sure.
Right?
The end of the world.
The end of the world. But
It's
I will never let you die. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, Lover, Rage, and Mary.
Can I talk about something that's not about the main characters?
Yes.
Yeah.
I really love microtrope style when the hero specifically, it's about men, I think, if there is a best friend on page, like I want that moment where the best friend is like, you're being a fucking idiot.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
that
moment is terrific, because that's two of them who understand.
Even better.
Yeah, right? Two of them who are evolved. I also really like it when it's like, when the friend is like, you're a fucking idiot, and then the response in the text eventually, not necessarily in the moment, but eventually is like, yeah, you're going to be an idiot next.
Yes. Yes. Or it's like the next guy's book and the first guy's like, remember when you told me I was a fucking idiot? Now you're being one. I just read one of that this week and I was like, oh, I like that a lot.
It's terrific because it feels like it. And again, it's obvious why I like this. It's like two men who are talking about feelings, and that's a rare occasion in the world.
That's a microtrope. I literally, like, one of the for the third book in Las Leonas, one of the quotes I have at the beginning of the book is literally Evan telling Apollo, one day a woman's going to blow up your life and I'm going to be there to laugh in your face.
Yes.
You know how I was like, oh, I just read one of these. What was it? And then I couldn't remember. It was your book. God damn it. I've read this
I mean,
book.
that is, again, men feeling feelings and being like, you're laughing now, but I have seen how you look at her and you, buddy, strap in.
Yep.
You know, I've been doing a lot of rereading, like re-listening to things on audio just because of like things I've had going on. And recently I re-listened to like a series that I listened to a long time ago, and it's the Lorraine Heath Texas series, which is like,
I just reread that recently too.
It's incredibly bananas. Like, I mean,
well, that's Lorraine. That's the gift
I would
of Lorraine.
I would really need to talk a lot about like various things about this and like what I think about it. But one of my favorite parts of it is like, you know, at the end at the end of like the
which
first book, I think
that's the road trip one.
What? The road trip one.
Yeah,
with Houston. When Houston's wife is like in labor and he's like, I'll never touch her again. Right?
That's a great moment.
And
yeah.
So real and historical, right?
And Dallas is like, you'll touch her.
Yeah.
He's like, you'll touch her. And then like in the second book, it's like the same thing. Dallas is like waiting for his wife to give birth and he's like, I'm never going to touch her again. And Houston is just like, you'll touch her. And I'm like, this is like,
there is a great
amazing
one of the Stephanie Lawrence's, one of the Sinster books has that exact same thing. And I want to say it's the epilogue. Like she is flat out in labor and all the Sinster heroes are just being hot and lazy in the waiting, like in the receiving room. And like they can hear the screaming stairs and the hero is just coming unraveled and they're all just fucking with him. And it is a delight to read.
Yeah.
Yeah. That series actually has some really excellent examples of like a lot of like really like the last book is like, it's basically a forced marriage. And she is like, it's one of those where like, she knows he doesn't want him. He doesn't want her, but like he totally does. Mm-hmm. And like the whole book is him feeling like he was entrapped into the marriage and then like kind of getting to know her. And like that dynamic of he feels like trapped into this marriage and she knows he doesn't want her and then like no one else does. And like how they come together. And he's of course like the most difficult of the heroes. That series is bonkers. I am not saying it because baby, it was written in the 90s. But if you can go in giving yourself that disclaimer.
Well,
Austin,
Texas in the 1800s.
Dallas,
I mean,
Houston, Dallas, Austin. Yeah. I read it like earlier this year and listen, it still hits.
Lorraine does a great job.
Oh, I mean, she just is like, I think I was talking about it online somewhere, but it's just like, especially in that first one, she's just like, yeah, catastrophe after catastrophe. Yep. Like, I'm just gonna like make everything worse for these people over and over again.
And you're like, yes.
Yes. That one and the Elizabeth Lowell, the first Elizabeth Lowell, is like that same kind of book where they literally have to cross like a mountain range. Sure. And he hates her guts the entire time.
Is that
and then
Untamed?
It's Only You, Only Mine. Like it's that series.
Oh my
and
God.
Listen, again, not endorsing, baby, because that one's even more bananas. But those two books, like that whole thing, like that traveling, like the harsh kind of like going through like the wilderness of America in like the 19th century is a particular kind of book that is really enjoyable.
And so many of those Scotland books are like that.
Yeah.
Too,
all the medievals.
Like,
I mean, the microtrope that I talk about all the time is like they are literally crossing the island of Britain. And she has never ridden a horse. And so she is sore, but she refuses. I mean, and she refuses to admit that she's sore. And then he like carefully helps her down off the horse, and usually she like collapses.
Mm.
And then he has to like wrap her in his kilt
Yes,
so that she won't be cold.
That's
Like,
the stuff. Yeah.
listen,
That's
It's the
stuff.
caretaking. I mean, like, right, like that piece. And it's like why, like, the trope of like someone gets sick and they have to take care of them always delivers, because it's like that. Those like tenderness moments are.
Oh, and when you combine Jen's exasperation trope with caretaking,
Oh, listen.
where it's like
That's
perfect.
there's like frustration, right? Like,
Yes.
why are you so weak and cold? But really, it's just
But
because
like, and then he gets naked and wraps her in his kilt. Because
Like, I
also
literally
he has
told
to
you.
stay up to stab anyone who comes near her.
Yes. Why did you go out in the
Naked.
snow?
Yes.
Because you yelled at me,
Yes.
and I went out in the snow, and now I'm dying.
Yeah.
And now you have to save
Which
me.
is right back to Kate's, you're in harm, but it's my fault.
Yeah.
See?
And
Yeah.
listen,
but it was my fault.
these buttons are installed in some really miraculous way, because if anybody in my life ever walked out into the snow because her partner yelled at her and then was dying, I would be like, what the fuck?
Yeah. No.
But I'll read it every time.
Well, that's why. Was it you, Sarah, who sent this? Like, it was the someone had so like was like, I hate baby girl or whatever. Like, it's just like, what is she, a child? This is a dumb thing to call somebody. And someone just quote tweeted and said, well, you're not the main character.
Congratulations, you're not the main character. The burn of it all.
The things that we want to read about are not the things that we want in real life. We all know that.
But I do think that this is the difference between like, now I think there is a large swath of readers who do want it to be like, these things do not slap for all readers.
Oh, yeah, of course.
There's a new reader who's like, I could never handle that, and therefore I can't read it.
Yes.
And I would just say, like, open your mind, my friends.
Yeah.
Lorraine is waiting.
I talk a lot about with you all, like the millennial romance as opposed to the Gen X romance, and how I do like I think there are differences in like the things that are
like at the DNA level, like
Right.
it's different.
Well, it's funny though, because I think that there are ways in which, like, I was reading like some sort of discourse somewhere. Maybe it was on the Discord. I don't quite remember, but they were talking about like and I think it was a contemporary romance that they like feel was sort of like in some way trying to channel like Lothair type vibes, but like not really hitting the mark. And I was like, well, how could you? Lothair is Lothair because he spent 600 years in a like feeding a tree with
Under
his
a blood tree.
right.
You cannot really actually make that like what is the equivalent in a regular person? It doesn't exist. And I think that right, I was like, you have to know that there are like limits, right? If you want to have the Lothair vibes, then what fuels it, right?
And with Lothair too, I feel like there's two things too. Like one, I don't know what it is like reading that book without having had Lothair for 11 books.
Yeah.
Prior.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Because I was primed.
Yes.
No.
Falling off the vine to receive Lothair when he was written.
Yeah.
And that's one thing. And two, by the time that she is in that book, like that world is so crisp. And like the way that it works is so finely honed that it's like you're entering something so familiar. Like the world itself is just so well developed at that point. And again, I feel like you need all of those elements to get like the maximum experience of Lothair. Like if you're walking cold at number 12, does it deliver?
No,
Like,
it can't.
It does. It can't.
It can't. But you do meet readers. We have a lot of listeners who just like started at Lothair for some reason. And like, it's hard. That's an impossible task.
I mean, it is impossible. I'm sure it's a different read. I will admit that I read that Caleb Krychek was my first like side changeling book.
Oh.
Like, I mean, I read the first one and then I skipped forward to that guy.
Moments. I think there are good places for you to, I mean,
I was like, I don't have time
in
to read
those
10 books. I
long
need to get to this
series,
one.
like part of the structure of those long series, and this is intentional on the part of writers, right? Is there are certain books that are meant to be on ramps. I just don't think Lothair is one of them.
No, it's not.
I mean, also, it's like, I would just say, in terms of like how tastes sort of change or shift, or what draws people into the genre and what feel like roadblocks them. I mean, like, it's not just that there were 11 books before Lothair. It's that like an entire network exists around that book, right? So like, and that network includes what you grew up watching, what you grew up listening to, what kind of event shaped you or whatever. That's going to condition how you respond to that book when it first came out versus like reading it now.
Right.
I mean, it's just a totally different experience, I think. And I mean, I think about that a lot when I read like brand new books that come out. I think a lot about like, what is the network that produced a book like this, versus like, especially if it's a debut, right? Like, what is the network that produced this debut versus like the network that produced, like Jennifer Crusoe's debut or something like that. Right. I think it's like, it's really interesting to think about.
I mean, and I think that's all part of like kind of the idea that romance is an archive, even for how masculinity presents, how femininity presents, how gender presents, how consent is discussed. Like if you go to thinking about a 2005 paranormal romance as opposed to a 2024 romantasy, when you think about the context of the world, the language that we have for a lot of things that we didn't have then, but like also like you were writing at a specific time where like perhaps the world felt different than it feels right now, like contrasting how everything is negotiated in terms of dynamics is different. Like, I mean, I do think that romance is an archive so much, not just of pop culture, but even how we
just culture,
how romance happens, how like meet cutes, like all of those things. Yeah. I mean, I do agree that I think like everything, like there's a container that holds how those books are, like what lab those books are like.
Were built in. Yeah. This week's episode of Fated Mates is brought to you by Buns and Roses, romance tea for literacy.
So this is an incredible opportunity for our Texas listeners, especially if I know how big Texas is, but especially if you're anywhere near Dallas. In October, there is a annual romance tea that is sponsored by the Dallas area romance writers, the Richardson Adult Literacy Center, and featuring some of the biggest names in romance every year. This happens every October, and it's called Buns and Roses.
I am air guitaring while we speak, everyone.
Excellent. The keynote speaker this year is the Maisie Yates, but the way that this is set up is really fun. I have been there, and there are tables, they sell these tickets, and every person who buys a ticket is seated at a table with an author, and the authors bring gifts for the people at their table. Sometimes it's books, or it's always books, but there's usually an extra gift too, like something else lovely. And then you listen, you have a lovely tea, a lunch at a tea, and then somebody speaks in that. This year is Maisie Yates. But also the table captains this year are people like Ilona Andrews and Bethany Bennett and Christy Caldwell, Elizabeth Essex, Avery Flynn, Amelie Howard, Angelina Lopez, Jana McGregor. I mean, huge names. Farrah Roshan is there this year, Harper St. George, and many, many more. You can find out more about Buns and Roses by heading to show notes, where we have the link to everything. This year's Buns and Roses is Sunday, October 20th from 1 to 4 p.m. at the Marriott by the Galleria in Dallas. This is just a lovely reader event for people who like don't want to go to a big conference but would love to have like a really nice time, and it's all for an incredibly important charity.
So, everybody, if you would like to find out more information about the Buns and Roses Romance Tea for Literacy and your podcasting app supports it, you can click on the chapter title right now to be taken to the event page. Thank you to Buns and Roses and the Richardson Adult Literacy Center for sponsoring this week's episode. It was funny. My friend Max was telling me this story about how he listens to audiobooks when he's running. We had this brain scientist in this week to talk about like learning the brain, which is like pretty standard stuff. And he was saying, he's like, it's really interesting. He's like, because I wonder about like how memory is going to change as kids are on their devices more. And he was saying, because it's like really weird. He's like, you know how you have these like really vivid memories of like the first place you ever heard a song? He's like, I now will like, if I'm like on my run, if I'm walking out in the neighborhood and I'm not running and I go past a place, I will remember what was happening in my audiobook when I was there.
Interesting.
And he's like, and it doesn't last that long. It's not like with a song. And I was like, well, yeah, because you hear a song over and over again. You cement that early memory. But it's like, I feel like that's what romance is. It's like what you're reading now and then the echo of when it was written. Always.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely I have those memories with romance moments. I mean, I've said, I think to all of you, like, I know exactly where I was when Jessica shot Dane. Like,
right.
Yeah.
I know.
And there are books that you remember reading the first time where you were. Yeah.
Yeah.
I cannot just remember when Jessica shot Dane, but I can remember every friend I ever told to read Lord of Scoundrels. I remember the text they sent me when Jessica shot Dane.
Amazing.
That's a shot her around the romance world.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I think you talk about this all the time too, Sarah, like that there are books that do things that you have never experienced before, have never read before, have never thought about like that. Even in terms of like falling in love, how that feels. And romance, like when you like that fresh feeling of like, this is something I have never read like this before is pretty freaking great.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? In large part because we know how all the books are going to end.
Right.
So it's the fact that we can still this far into our reading journeys, this far into the genre, be able to say like, this book did it different. Like this book feels fundamentally different. And also exactly the same.
Yeah.
And
that's the beauty. It never gets old, right?
It's
like
amazing.
Yeah.
So if you're new to romance and new to us, boy, do you have a wild ride ahead of you. Thank you both so much for joining us for our first episode of season 7. We are very blessed to have you in our big Fated Mates family.
We could have done microtropes all day.
Yeah.
We could have done the joy of romance all day.
We could have just done a 48-hour marathon of microtropes.
Well, now that the group chat's going to get lit, it's going to be
remembering the ones we forgot to mention.
But before we go, let's do a little promotion. Tell us about your most recent book, everyone, so everyone can run out and get it, even though we've talked about them both on our podcast multiple times. But Adriana, you go first.
Well, my most recent release was An Island Princess Starts a Scandal, which is the second book in S07.01 series. But
you also had a novella too, so don't forget that. But do the first one first.
Yeah, that one is sapphic romance set in Paris in 1889, a duchess and an artist. And then I had The Bootlegger's Bounty, which is a poly romance at sea, and it's she's a stowaway and then gets caught in the ship of a bootlegger and a gangster are kind of robbing, and then shenanigans ensue.
When you told me I wasn't allowed to read.
Yes,
that's the one book that if you read it, I cannot look you in the eye the next time I see you. But people
guys sent something to enjoy on your Instagram,
it
and you were like, this one's not for you, Kate.
No. And even for people that I know could enjoy it, I still can't quite look at them in the eye the first time I see it after they read it.
Kate.
My most recent release is The Other Side of Disappearing, which is about a true crime podcast producer and the subject of the story that he is trying to get answers on, and the road trip they take to get those answers. And so that is out now in paperback and audio and ebook. And I love it, and I'm really proud of it. So,
and new books from both of you sometime soon.
Sometime soon.
It's in February.
Might be a little longer.
What do we want to say? It's season 7. If you love listening to people just talk about romance, you can listen to us every week at fatedmates.net or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also join our Patreon, which gives you access to one extra episode every month where we just do this. And also it gives you access to the Fated Mates Discord, where there are Fated Mates listeners all talking about romance and the books that they love all the time. So you can just get 24/7 right into your veins romance chatter. I'm Sarah McLean. I'm here with my friend Jennifer Prokop and Kate Clayborn and Adriana Herrera. We are Fated Mates, and you can also find us online at Fated Mates Pod on Instagram and Threads, and at Fated Mates everywhere else. And we're still doing phone banks. Have a great week, everyone. Thanks for being with us for 7 seasons. Thanks to Kate and Adriana for being here. Go read their books. They're fabulous. We love them very much.